before, but it's really wondering whether we are doing what we could do in reading facial expressions. You may recall a couple of years ago, I gave a presentation called The Fading Art of Observation. And one of my gripes traditionally has been that we have sacrificed a lot with going to the electronic medical record and having the laptop in the room. I think too many patients I've overheard saying about one of us, he never looked up. And so that led me to do work in what I call digital media addiction. And our student, Tom Grichala, spoke on that a couple of years ago to the residents. And the plea is to be more mindful of how we use digital devices when we're with patients. Are we missing opportunities to make eye contact and to record emotions? Because the eyes are really where the seat of the emotions can be. I think that what I wanted to do this semester with David Strickland, who's going to join me in a few minutes, is look at the history of how we've looked at patients and how they look at us and what we're really supposed to be recording and what are we supposed to be focusing on. You know, the assumption is that we've got to write down every bit of data and record all those lab values and make sure that we correlate, you know, the hemoglobin A1C with the clinical condition of diabetes. But really, you know, when did all that clinical correlation come about? When did we spend more time in hospital medicine filling out numbers on the charts than we did at bedside observing the patient? This is all behind the scenes in going into this particular presentation. And let me just see if I can call this up and see if we could do this. So am I getting the full screen? I'm showing a partial screen on mine. Let's see if that works there. Whoop, that's making it worse. I'm going to have to call on my colleague, Kevin, to ask me how to get out this part of the...
Go up to the top, Alan, where it says slideshow.
Slideshow. Yes. There we go.
Real quick before you start, though, go back real quick. Okay.
Okay. Right.
Hopefully it'll be all right.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Kevin Bailey, everybody. He's just accepted to the doctoral program in archivist studies, and he's been working at the Center for the Study of Tobacco and Society. In my opinion, the situation got so bad that in the journal Family Medicine, there was this article that appeared on electronic health record specific communication skills for medical students. And of course, as you can see, the bad way to use your laptop in the room with the patient is when you have that laptop sitting in front of you and it sort of interfering with that close relationship and almost setting a barrier between you and the patient. But then they're suggesting that on the right, that there's that good way to look at where you're sort of angling over, you've got the laptop over there and you can make eye contact. But and these authors loved so much their way of thinking that they wrote another article that was published less than a year later in the same journal with the same exact photograph, only this time they actually had a name for it and they called it the Doctor-Patient Electronic Health Record Triangle. Well, is there something missing here? It struck me something missing right away, that there's a third way. There's the laptop in front of you and there's a laptop over here, which they're saying is the good way. But what about the not laptop at all? What about sitting in front of the patient, maybe with some notes, but not necessarily typing away? And again, I'm just saying that this is what struck me when I saw that particular image. I think it splits our attention. I think it diminishes the opportunity for interaction. And I think we're not concentrated as much as we could be on expression. Now, in Bob Rakel's textbook of family medicine, I always hold this up because I have a chapter on smoking with Dr.
Alan, you're muted.
Unmute.
You're still muted, Dr. Bluff. There you go.
Was I unmuted since the beginning?
Yeah, you just muted yourself accidentally a minute ago. You're fine now.
Well, you saw the good and the bad patient triangle thing?
Yeah.
Well, the point was that by using electronic devices, I think our attention is divided and we're not devoting as much time as we could to what Dr. Rakel calls in the textbook nonverbal communication. You know, when we sign out to each other and we listen on morning report, it's pretty much we're relying on what the patient said. But are we at all including some of those nonverbal communications, the body language, the facial expressions, the touching, the mirroring, the whatever it is, that there's a major chapter. And in fact, there's an entire section in Dr. Rakel's textbook devoted to the art of communication. And part of that is not missing the nonverbal cues. Language is what we think we're mainly communicating in, but attitudes and emotions are communicated at the nonverbal level. And verbally, it's not even as good as we think because we're constantly censoring what we're saying. We don't want to say impolite words. We don't want to really, but our own facial expressions will often give that away when we say the patient says, "Oh, I'm fine," and we see the patient grimacing, or you know, actually a patient said to me once, you know, "I'm doing fine, I guess," and then the next one, it didn't take her long to say, "Well, I'm getting divorced." I mean, it was like within 30 seconds, "Oh no, I'm fine." But if we don't hear the rest of it and look at her when she's saying that, it can be misunderstood. The eyes in particular are the principal organs of expression. I'm citing Rakel's textbook. They impart a lot of information. They're so important that when we desire anonymity, we cover our eyes, and just our eyes. Eyebrows, I've heard in reading the chapter on expressions and microexpressions in Dr. Rakel's textbook, have over 40 different positions to express emotion. Eyelids, 23. Even just the lower eyelid can have separate meanings and separate expressions. Then there's the length of how long we look at someone. There's the intensity of how we watch someone or how we glare. We've looked at pupils that are dilated, and that gives off a different message than pupils are contracted. That's why gamblers in Las Vegas, when they're playing blackjack or poker, they wear sunglasses, because you can see what kind of hand they get when their pupils react to that. When we show baby pictures to single men versus married men, you see differences in pupillary reaction. You also see it, as I could see now if I were looking out and getting my magnifying glass out, we'd see pupillary reactions when you're interested in a presentation or when you're not. So sincerity can also be expressed with the eyes. When we are working with patients, eye contact evokes sincerity, it evokes respect, it dignifies the encounter. But in some cultures, it can be misunderstood. I know in many of my Mexican-American patients or patients from Mexico, there's no prolonged eye contact. It's a sign of respect to look down more frequently. And something, we don't time things, but more than 3 seconds is considered in almost any culture not something you want to do, to look straight at someone for 3 full seconds at a time. Basically, the ratio that Rakel talks about is about 50-50, 50% eye contact in an encounter, 50% not. With patients, their eye contact with us is actually a lot less than that, maybe a quarter of the time. And there are different eye contact data on patients with depression versus patients with anxiety. The patients with depressions are obviously looking down. Patients with anxiety, often back and forth, quick and side to side. Let's see. I hope I didn't mute myself again. But these days, it's become even more difficult to make it with facial expression when we have masks. So I think, frankly, this is a timely topic that requires our greater attention. This is one of the recent issues of the Pharos, the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society journal. If we go back to the earliest modern anatomist, well, really, about 800 years ago, that's one of the early anatomical drawings of Vesalius, who suddenly took these flat, two-dimensional, plain, almost like cartoon-like drawings of the anatomy in the Middle Ages, and he made them three-dimensional, and he made them come alive by putting backgrounds and scenery in them. But you could see how the different muscles of Vesalius, and that's believed to be Vesalius himself, showing you how he's dissected the upper extremity. You see how that image can make something come alive. And Charles Bell is considered the physician who brought anatomy further alive by very artful works that were literally making the anatomy that he would see through his prosections come alive, in that he was also an artist. And in fact, I think his greater interest was in art. And in Edinburgh, he was working on a book called Essays on the Anatomy of the Expression in Painting. And in order to do that, he based this on the philosophy was not just to convince painters of the value of the study of anatomy, which many artists did at that time, like Leonardo, but to demonstrate his belief that expression is to passion what language is to thought. He deplored the sole use of antiques and models, this little figures that you would put by your thing and you would draw from them. They didn't have any expression. They were just in positions and postures. And so he wanted to look at anatomy right on the anatomy table and see what were the muscles that were responsible for these expressions, not just in humans, but also in animals. And he really looked closely at infants as well, because he thought that infants were pure emotion, that they could really have a kind of purity that you couldn't get in adults. And I'm just reading from a British Medical Journal article on this. Bell wrote on expression in animals, believing that man had certain muscles absent in other animals, whose sole function was the rich variety of facial expression of which man is capable. He gave as examples the corrugator superciliae, which arises from the frontal bone near the union with the nasal bones and is inserted into the skin of the eyebrow. It knits the eyebrows, hence supercilious. And the depressor anguli oris, a muscle I have not yet found in any other animal. It produces that arching of the lip so expressive of contempt, hatred, and jealousy. So this was one of his own drawings of suspicion or jealousy. You could just see the intensity of that expression. I jumped to an artist of the 18th century, Greuze, who focused on heads of what he called tête d'expression, or heads or busts of pure expression, and how the use of the drawing technique could sink in the cheeks, perhaps showing weight loss, could show malnutrition, looking at the furrowing of the brow to show worry, anxiety, and the tensing of the lips and the downcast, almost frown-like attitude of the muscles around the lips. You can see these beautiful drawings and the use of just simple lines to express anxiety or fear, and the widening of the eyes, and total anguish, for instance, in this patient or in this individual, or fear and worry, and just those two little areas around the bridge of the nose. This is another painter, also from the 18th going into the 19th century, Géricault. He lived just from 1794 to 1821. And yet he was one of the greatest portrait painters of all times. This particular woman, I first saw this when I did an elective in neurology at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, where Géricault would go with permission of Charcot to study the insane. And this was a woman with what was called monomanie. She was, I guess you would say at that time, obsessive compulsive. And he drew out these rich expressions, or this was supposed to be a kleptomaniac. He also had access to the morgue, and he drew extensively some of the finest portraits of facial expression that have ever been done. We had Daumier in the 19th century, perhaps the world's greatest caricature artist, who exaggerated expressions. And this was Le Malade Imaginaire, the hypochondriac. You could see the little tense lips and the cheeks and the wide eyes, and his feeling his pulse, how worried he is at all times about illness. These were drawings by Dr. Frank, Dr. Leonard Frank, who was the dentist who accompanied Albert Schweitzer in Lamborghini in Ghana, in Gabon, in Africa, where Albert Schweitzer had his clinic. And he was so fascinated with the faces of the Gabonese people that came to get health care. These are well-known drawings of his. In the early 1990s, I was contacted by Dr. Paul McIntyre, who would later become head of palliative care at Halifax, Dalhousie University, one of the oldest and finest medical schools in Canada. When he was doing his research in palliative care, he decided to look at the use of portrayal in clinical medicine. And he went back to look at, when did we really stop looking more at the patient than at the lab results and the MRIs? And when did we stop really gleaning what we could from our analysis of the symptoms that the patient was reporting to us in his or her words, or the signs they were telling us through their own facial and expressions and body language? And he discovered that Morgagni really was the modern pathologist who wanted to relate in the late 1700s the clinical observations that we were making of patients with confirming them with post-mortem examination. He wanted to see if all the things we thought the patient was suffering from when the patient was alive could be verified when patients died. And he was really considered the earliest pathologist to do post-mortem examinations. By the late 1870s, when Osler was also a pathologist, the science that Virchow and other pathologists had perfected was enabling us to confirm or see where we might have missed diagnoses by doing autopsies and postmortem examinations. But at the same time, what were the clinical records? When we did our Winternet's conference a year ago on scribes, and we talked about the history of medical records, I made the point that the modern medical record that we're looking at today and the modern hospital and its priorities didn't really get gelled into as late as the 1920s. You would not recognize a hospital record on a patient in Osler's time. It didn't have all of the lab values front and center and all of the imaging. It was 95% related to history. And there was real sentences and narrative, and they would talk about facial expressions a lot more than we would ever do today. And Dr. McIntyre looked up some of the use of what he called portrayal, and the use of even putting pictures in the charts of patients, which he came across with medical records. And he came across work that I had done in the Journal of the American Medical Association. This was published in 1981, sort of a series of sketches I had done in the waiting room as a medical student and resident of patients. And he was struck by how I had brought out the facial expressions. This is just a collage of these that were really very quickly done, no more than 3 or 4 minutes with ballpoint pen and whatever prescription pad or scraps of paper I may have had. This was actually the very first talk I ever gave in Tuscaloosa, where I was invited to give the commencement talk to the residents on seeing patients and how we look at patients. And then in the journal Literature and Medicine, Mary Winkler commented, she was a great humanist and a literature expert embedded in a medical school to teach the humanities. She commented on some of my sketches. This was a grieving woman who had lost her son and who had terrible marital problems. This was what I had in the Canadian Medical Association Journal a few years ago, a series of stories and sketches. This man said, government gave me a chance to get a hearing aid for free, but when I went to the doctor, he said, well, Captain, there's going to be a lot of things you don't want to hear. And this is the work that Dr. McIntyre didn't know at the time, but another Canadian who was actually also born in Edinburgh, Mark Gilbert, who's not a physician, but whose father was an artist and he became an artist. And Mark found my artwork when he was doing his doctoral thesis on the use of facial expressions and portraiture in medicine. And Mark now is a professor at the University of Nebraska. He's back from Canada and Edinburgh, and he's now working at the University of Nebraska, looking at the relationship between art and medicine. And these are some of the portraits that he has done of patients. He's often worked with patients with cancer, and they actually sit for him for weeks on end, and he gets to know them very well and reflects these in his paintings. This is a man with Alzheimer's disease and his wife. And these portraits literally took at least 1 to 2 months to accomplish. And he's written about this in the British Medical Journal and others. This is one of the articles, Portraits of Care, Medical Research Through Portraiture. Well, Darwin, who we all know from anatomy and evolution and the survival of the fittest, didn't exactly agree with Bell. And Darwin believed that there is a unique pattern of nonverbal actions in each emotion, suggested that emotional expressions are evolutionary remnants of previous adaptive behavior. So he thought, no, the animals were one thing, but human beings are another thing. And he said snarling is an example. Where do we get that from? I don't think animals, he said, I don't think they have the capability of exactly, if they can snarl, we don't do it in the same way. In any event, he wanted to write a book, and he did produce a book on facial expressions in both man and animals. And he used as his basis the work of a French neurologist, and this was his book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. And he used that picture in the lower half of the screen of the man with his eyes sort of, staring at you, a little bit surprised, and his mouth open. And if you see those hands at the side, those are actually electrodes shocking a patient at the Salpêtrière in France to force him to stay in that actual expression. This was a cruel experiment designed to get that individual to have a certain expression that were recorded by Duchenne so that we could look at man's different kinds of expressions. I mean, Darwin agreed that this was a way that we could see which musculature was responsible for which human expression. Unfortunately, this was taken a little bit too literally by a lot of people, and something called eugenics arose out of Darwin's work and the study of facial expressions, to the point where we began looking in science. And we're talking about Harvard here. We're talking about the head of the American Eugenics Society. That means perfection of the human race at Harvard University. Looking at phrenology, or the shape of the skull, or by looking at facial expressions, we could determine that they must be inferior in some way or criminal. And Josiah Nott, after whom Nott Hall until recently was named, where the medical school was and where my office was for the better part of 20 years, Nott was a white supremacist doctor in the 19th century who fomented a lot of the belief that the white race was superior, because he could show through all of the work of Darwin and the work of phrenologists and looking at facial expressions, how superior the white race was. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this is what was popular, not just in the South, not just in Alabama, but he became a celebrated New York physician, and people honored him for his white supremacist beliefs. And criminals had a facial profile that suspects could be arrested on the basis of how they looked and not on any other reason whatsoever. And these criminal profiles, this comes from an actual police guide of how you look at certain expressions, and you might then stop them and accuse them of being a certain kind of criminal on the basis of no other evidence whatsoever. And sad to say that in the United States, this is how we looked at people within racial stereotypes. And again, it's horrible. It's a perfectly timely opportunity to raise this issue this week, but you see the natural outgrowth of when racism turns into supremacism and turns into violence and turns into actual genocide, as occurred first of the mentally ill in Germany, and then of Jewish and Gypsy people and others. And so again, without getting ideological about this, Hitler used the American eugenics movement as the very basis for his, and believe it or not, although we revere Darwin, we have to admit that Darwin, if he personally didn't mislead us, people who interpreted his work did, and they created a movement that we're still living down today, where sterilizations and literally lethal activity was done up until really the 1960s to begin correcting what was being done in the United States of America and elsewhere. Well, one group that did know all about influencing doctors to look at facial expressions more carefully was the pharmaceutical industry. And this ad comes from a 1966 medical journal called MD, where they said, can you spot the hypertensive? So they knew that there was extensive work on facial expressions, and that let's get doctors believing that hypertensive have a stereotypical look. And of course, the answer was this one. I mean, you talk about nonsense, but this was to get them to prescribe a medication called endodiaryl. Or this one, control both his blood pressure and his apprehension with butaserapazide. I mean, it's just astonishing that we were led into this. If you saw this in this magazine ad, you would then be able to make the connection in the patient sitting across from you. Or why these 7 patients with moderate to severe anxiety may respond better to Mellaril, which was a major tranquilizer. They even told you, if you see this now, we've got a drug just for you. And what about a clear and beautiful face, the self-confidence that she radiates? You've got to give them Pfizer-Hex. Well, again, we were being taught facial expression almost without our knowledge by pharmaceutical companies who created our stereotypifying prescribing patterns. But getting back to how can we apply it usefully? Why focus on the face? I think we need to look at how, by focusing on facial expressions, we can become more capable of seeing how facial expressions can evoke human expressions, can be a reflection of human emotions, that we're looking more at nonverbal communication, and that we're seeing that nonverbal communication can be more powerful and more important and more genuine than verbal communication. With that, I'd like to turn it over to David Strickland, who spent the semester helping me explore these new approaches and old approaches to looking at facial expression.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blum. May I share my screen now? Is that good to go?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and share.
And you could do that slideshow as Dr. Stryfer taught me.
Yes, sir. Perfect. So play from here. All right. So first and foremost, I'd just like to thank Dr. Blum and Kevin both. They've been very helpful to me and giving me this opportunity to research and look into some of these issues as Dr. Blum has discussed. So, you know, why do we need to focus on the face? That was the first question that I looked into when I began with Dr. Blum. And really, unlike words, the face is able to communicate the full range of human emotion. In addition to that, 1/3 of the communication that we do is entirely nonverbal. So if you neglect to focus on the face or choose not to try to understand the face better, you could be missing out on 33% of what somebody's trying to say. And finally, it's more genuine than verbal communication as well. When someone's verbal communication and their nonverbal communication conflict, the nonverbal is more accurate. And Dr. Blum alluded to that earlier when he discussed, you know, the patient says they're fine, but there's clearly something wrong with them. And then he finds out they had a divorce. So just that's the basis of why we need to focus on the face. And this is an image that I pulled from Gary Fagan's book. It's an artist's guide to facial expression. And I really included this just to show the wide variety and range of different expressions that we're capable of making as humans. You can see here the skepticism face and the happiness face. That's two very, very different emotions. However, there are just subtle differences between those two that if we're not paying attention to the face, we may not pick up on those. And the same goes for pain and disapproval. A lot of wrinkling, frowning, and kind of a scowl as well. If we're not paying attention to the face, then we can misinterpret that one for the other. And I'm going to play this video here. Let's see if that'll work. Kevin, is there a way that I can play this from the presentation here?
maybe I can do this. Let me see. I'm so sorry about this. We worked on this.
Yeah, my apologies.
So let's see if I can do this. It's well worth it. And let's see. Well, it's going to certainly cut our presentation time in half, but let's see. I think our best laid plans did not work. Let me try to ask if Kevin can at some point pull this up. But I guess our embeds did not enable us to do this. This is the work of Dr. Paul Ekman, who in the early 1960s began to look at Darwin's work and look at work on facial expression and realize we really hadn't shown any of this work in other cultures. So he went to different places all over the world, and especially in this island in the South Pacific that had really had no human contact, didn't know what a camera was, didn't know what a television was. And he was such a novelty that they welcomed into his society. And he studied specifically how facial expressions might differ, how they didn't recognize certain facial expressions of ours. They couldn't interpret his facial expression for certain things, certain fear or anger. Theirs were entirely different. Does that give you a little bit, Kevin, Joshua, to go on from there?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that'll be perfect. So
can you control that?
Yes, let me go back to sharing my screen real quick.
What we're going to try to do is by the time we get through this, we're going to see if we can pull up that other video, which is sort of summarizing what we came across when we.
I think I can play it now. For ready.
Okay. Kevin said he thinks we can play it. So this is what we get with live action. And let's see if he can do that. We'll wait maybe 20, 30 seconds if he can pull that up. I don't know if we can hear that though. Everything but the audio. Well, he was challenging Margaret Mead, really, and that's what he wanted to do. I guess we're not going to get that audio there. And he talked about Darwin, but the success of these videos, by the way, and showing them is in inverse proportion to the amount of time that we spent working on this. So I just want you to know. But I think for now, then we'll just resume. And we have one more video later on. We'll see if we could maybe wrap it up with that one. But right now, let's just continue if we could.
Perfect. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen then. All right. And so moving forward from that and building off what Dr. Blum said about Ekman, he's a more modern psychologist. He's been working since the 1960s, and he still does a little bit of work today. And based on those studies that the video mentioned, he has come up with this theory that there are 7 cardinal emotions or core emotions that as humans, we express them frequently. And they're generally constant across cultures. So in Africa, Europe, Asia, it's expressed essentially the same way each of these 7 emotions are as we would express them here or anywhere else around the world. So the take-home message from that is if a physician can understand these cardinal emotions, they can have a substantially higher chance of understanding their patient and providing higher quality care for them. That being said, medicine is not the only application that Ekman's work has. It's implied in police investigations, questioning subjects that could potentially have committed a crime. It's used in airport security, as I'll get to a little bit later. It's used in surveillance systems as well. So at the scene of a crime, they'll go back and see if there was someone acting suspicious at the scene of the crime prior to when the crime was committed. Stuff like that, that Ekman's work is used in many different facets. With that being said, I wanted to give a little bit more background on Ekman before continuing on into what these 7 different cardinal emotions are. He began looking into deception detection in the 1960s when he studied film of a psychiatric patient. This patient assured her doctors that she wasn't suicidal, but then committed suicide days later. So Ekman, of course, scoured the film, and he noticed a fleeting expression that this woman gave off. It only lasted for a fraction of a second, but it revealed the distress she was trying to hide from the doctors and that those doctors missed out on. And Ekman calls these micro expressions, or signs of concealed emotions that go away as fast as 1/30th of a second. And then Ekman's theory is that people reveal their behavior through facial expression, and this is the basis for modern behavior detection, which is used in airport security, police. It can be used by physicians as well. There is other data that supports Ekman's research. When emotions are spontaneously aroused, blind people produce the same facial expressions as sighted people do. However, his work doesn't come with criticisms as well. As I discussed, it's used in airport security, but that can be very beneficial. In an 18-month span from 2006 to 2007, 278 people were arrested due to making suspicious facial expressions. They were brought into the police and they were found to have actually been committing some sort of crime. But this also comes at a cost, because with that, there comes false accusations. And basing a suspicion on solely facial expression makes words and other data that may be beneficial to the person in question less meaningful. Those officers are already suspicious right at the get-go because of Ekman's work and this idea that observing someone's face can give off how they're feeling 100% accurately. And another criticism of Ekman's work, Spanish psychologists and researchers Crivelli and Jarillo questioned Ekman's original research at that island that Dr. Blum discussed earlier. They immersed themselves in the local culture, and they showed the villagers an established set of faces that are used in psychological research. The villagers did match smiling with happiness, which is universal. We smile when we're happy as well. However, they couldn't widely agree on some facial expressions like pouting, nose scrunching. There was some disagreement between the villagers themselves as to which emotions these images were showing. And interestingly, they also associated wide-eyed, lips parted, gasping face with anger and not with fear, submission, as we might in Western culture. So this study suggests that there are some facial reactions and interpretations that vary from culture to culture. So next, I wanted to show just this comical strip here. It was pulled from a newspaper, and it says, "How's your teenager feeling today?" And it has all these different emotions on here, but the face is exactly the same in each one. So, today people, and specifically teenage age range, want to hide things from their parents. And, the sad truth is that the face is not always going to be a 100% accurate depiction of someone's emotions or feelings. As in the case of this teenager from this comic strip, his face is the same regardless of how he's feeling. So he's doing a really good job of hiding that. And then here are the 7 cardinal emotions with an addition of neutral in the top left corner here. A neutral face is not one of Ekman's 7. However, with that being said, it is still very significant because there will be patients in appointments that are being neutral with neutral faces, and they're not feeling much of anything. Their mind can be blank sometimes if they're zoning out or other things like that. But looking at this strip, the other emotions are fear, anger, sadness, contempt, happiness, disgust, and surprise. And I wanted to go through each one of these specifically one by one. And I'll start with disgust. When someone's disgusted, their upper lip is raised high, while the lower lip is raised and protruding slightly, as you can see here in his mouth, almost like a puckering of his lips. There's also a wrinkle that extends from above the nostrils downward to below the lip. And it's deep and it forms an inverted U, as you can see. And there's also going to be wrinkles that appear on the bridge of the nose and the sides of the nose, as you can see here when someone's disgusted. The next is anger. When someone's angry, their eyebrows are pulled down. Their jaw is going to be thrusted forward, as you can see here. And then their lips are narrowed and pressed together. Now, somebody could be disgusted or angry in an appointment if the physician were to make some sort of mistake or some sort of improper diagnosis. When someone's sad, you get a different facial reaction. The eyelids relax, which cause it to droop and partially cover the iris, as you can see here. The lip corners also point down into the shape of a frown, typically. And with fear, the lip corners are drawn back. So there's a subtle difference between this and the frowning, as you can see with sadness. Her mouth is open and it exposes the teeth as if she's gasping or maybe about to yell. But the lip corners are drawn back and the eyebrows are also raised up, which causes the eyes to look very wide. And a patient may be sad or fearful after receiving some sort of serious diagnosis like cancer. Next is contempt. Like anger, the lips are tightened and pressed together. However, this can sometimes be mistaken for enjoyment or happiness because it almost can appear to be a smile. There's only really that action on one half of the face with the lips, but at just one glance, you could mistake that for a smile and the patient being happy. So it's important to note that. With surprise, there's a contraction of the muscle in the forehead that raises the eyelids and also causes the eyes to look more wide. However, the difference there is below the nose, you're also going to notice her opening her mouth wide, but there's a different facial structure around the mouth between surprise and fear. With happiness, the lip corners are typically going to be pointed up into the shape of a smile. The eyebrows are raised and the corners of the eyes are going to squint. In some people, the cheeks are going to puff out as well. So you can kind of see a little puffing here in his face. A patient may be happy if lab tests come back with satisfactory results or a certain condition that they had has regressed or gone away. So there's some good news that they've received in their appointment. Next, I wanted to go back through these with a more distinct focus on the anatomy of the face and the muscles that are going through these and causing these expressions. So when someone's disgusted, as I discussed earlier, you're going to see some wrinkling here on the nose. And when you kind of scrunch your face like that, it's a contraction of the muscles here in the forehead, as well as in the cheek. When somebody's angry, the muscles get really tense around the mouth, which causes the lips to be pursed together really closely and to thrust the jaw forward. That also is a result of a contraction of muscles here. And there are also muscles working to cause that scowl and the eyebrows to furrow a little bit, which Dr. Blum discussed earlier with Bell's work. When someone's sad, this is largely relaxation. The cheeks droop down, the eyebrows droop down. So nothing's really tensing when someone's sad. It's like the muscles are relaxing and causing the face to be droopy and gloomy. With fear, the muscles tense around the lips, which causes the corners of the lips to draw back. That can also cause the opening of the mouth there. And then there's a contraction of the muscle in the forehead, which draws the eyebrows upwards and causes the eyes to be more wide open than normal. With contempt, as I touched on earlier, it's really only half the face. There are muscles that pull the lips back here, but on this side, it's a pretty neutral expression. When someone's surprised, like fear, muscles are going to draw the corners of the lips back and cause the mouth to open, as well as muscles in the forehead draw the eyebrows up and cause the eyes to be more wide open. And with happiness, the eyes squint, as well as muscles draw the corner of the lips back into a smile. So specifically in the medical setting, it's important to notice facial expression because it builds rapport between the physician and the patient. This rapport allows for higher patient satisfaction, and ultimately, if you're getting along, it's going to provide higher quality care for them as well. And next, I wanted to touch on Rakel's textbook of family practice that Dr. Blum cited earlier. There are a couple really great images in here that display the dangers of just glossing over the face and not paying close attention to the expressions that people are making. In this first one here, if you just glance at her face, it appears that she's smiling because her mouth is, it appears that she's happy, because her mouth is in a slight smile. However, Rakel says that she's masking sadness and she's actually disappointed. And his reasoning for that is that the eyelids are drooping down, as I showed in the sadness, over the iris, partially covering it. And she has some droopy eyelids, some sad eyelids. In applying that principle to this as well, This is obviously the same woman, and their expression is largely the same from the nose and below. However, this is a different expression between the two. And Rakel says with person A, the eyelids are in neutral position, but in person B, they're in that sad, disappointed, gloomy position as they were in the last example I showed. So in this image, this is an image of happiness. The corners of the lips are drawn way up, exposing the teeth. The cheeks are puffing out, as I discussed earlier, and the corners of the eyes are going to squint down. Is there anything else you wanted to add here, Dr. Blum?
Well, I was hoping we could show this video. We'll get the link to people. It's just a dynamite summary of everything David has just said, and she is a great actress and walks us through these things, really makes it more relevant and reinforces what David and I have been trying to impart. So we'll see if Kevin might be able to get that working. If not, we'll send the link.
Perfect. Thank you.
Also, I wanted to add too that I'm sending a poster from our last presentation that Joshua Kelly put together and I put together with him.
All right, perfect.
Is that on his screen or yours?
So here, this is a work by Dr. John Ragsdale. He did this work at Pittsburgh School of Medicine in 2011. He currently is at the University of Kentucky, and Dr. Blum actually had an extensive conversation with him about this work, because he also is very interested in facial expression and the way that we move our faces in order to give off different emotions. This workshop was 90 minutes in duration. It included lecture and interactive components, and its focus was teaching physicians to interpret facial expressions. After this workshop, he divided the knowledge into 3 different sections: skill, fact-based knowledge, and case-based knowledge. But the most important message to take home from this graph is that there was a substantial improvement in the percent correct post-workshop compared to pre-workshop. Before his workshop that taught physicians and physicians in training about different facial expressions and emotions, he showed them a group of roughly 15 photos that consisted of different expressions and emotions and had them guess what he thought the patient was feeling and why. So these are the lighter gray figures you see here. Clearly, the physicians were not too great at accurately analyzing and recognizing the emotion that was being expressed. However, after the workshop, they substantially improved, as you can see, some dramatic jumps in each category post-workshop. The other major aspect of my work this semester has been analyzing a series of images with striking facial expressions. And Dr. Blum has collected these images over the past decade. These come from newspaper and magazine photographs. They come from advertisements, paintings, drawings, sculpture, and really any source that he could find that had a striking facial expression. And he showed you some of these when he was discussing some of the artists earlier. But really just a very extensive collection that I've gone through. I did some photocopying of these and went through these images to try to analyze how these people were feeling. So up first here, we have this man here. Is there anything that sticks out to you all about this photograph in terms of expression?
Looks a little apprehensive.
For sure, absolutely. Anything else?
Kind of seems like he's hiding something.
Yeah, that's another good take too. And again, there's not necessarily a right answer to this, but what I noted, and Dr. Blum as well, was that he has a cutting glare. He's looking out of the corners of his eyes at the photographer. He's not looking at him straight on. And that kind of tells me that he's disappointed or angry or annoyed with the photographer taking his picture. Again, there are multiple interpretations. He very well could be hiding something, which is why he's kind of glancing at him out of the side of his eyes. But this is just a great example from Dr. Blum's collection of facial expression and what.
Just before you go on, this is a rather noted photograph by a photographer, I believe Robert Bergman. His first exhibition as a photographer came in his mid-60s. And I saw one of his exhibitions at the National Gallery in Washington a couple of years ago. And I was so drawn to this. as many people are. His exhibition was largely of homeless and street people. And he did have their permission to take these photographs. He did talk about their weariness, the secrets that they're keeping. And it's just, to me, such pathos in this, and yet such dignity. He's got matted hair. He's on the streets. He's holding a book of some sort. I'd say I could spend an hour looking at this and trying to figure out what's going on and thinking of the photographer's emotion and what drew the photographer to photograph this man. But the point is, I don't think anyone looking at this image can look past it and just say, okay, well, you know, that's a guy that's glaring at you.
Absolutely. This next image here, Dr. Blum, I forget his name. Would you mind reminding me who
Sure,
this
well,
is?
I'd love anyone to comment on this in any way, shape, or form. Play word salad, free association. Any comments, any particular thoughts when you see this image?
He looks displeased.
Displeased. Very good.
Concerned.
Indeed, yes, very concerned.
He looks kind of skeptical, or like he's not really believing whatever he's being told right now.
Well, that's great. He doesn't want to believe it. I know that, as I'll tell you and who he is and what he's thinking in a minute, because I know what he's thinking. This is all about not knowing the context, but when I give you the context, I think it will make sense. A couple of more thoughts.
Disbelief.
Could be. Again, look at that. I think he's scowling. I think he's downcast. I think look at how you couldn't drop his lower parts of his mouth any lower. And yet maybe he's sort of trying to keep a stiff upper lip in a way where he's putting his chin and where he's a little defiant, but clearly the eyes and the squinting, he's either furious or angry, or he doesn't know how to get out of this moment. Any thoughts as to who he is or what might be going on? You see he's wearing a fine suit and presumably a tie.
It's Rupert Murdoch.
Yes, how did you know that, Chris?
Because I know who he is.
Yeah, thanks so much. Who is he?
He owns Fox News as well as a number of other media companies in other countries.
Yeah, and again, we didn't plan this, but in light of the insurrection last Wednesday, you could look at his role in this as the progenitor of a kind of news that is broadcast on Fox News that doesn't necessarily always reflect the reality of the elections and so forth. But this is the moment less than a decade ago in which he was called before a parliamentary hearing in the United Kingdom and basically told that he wouldn't be getting the license to get a hold of the largest television network in the United Kingdom because his employees at one of the newspapers he owned at the time were breaking into people's private cell phones and publishing information on them, including someone who had committed suicide, a lot of celebrities. And this had never been done before. And this was so abhorrent that it caused total outrage. And his newspaper, he had to actually close the newspaper, costing several hundred people their jobs. And he said it was the worst day of his life. He seemed to be saying he was taking responsibility. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. I've actually met him. He was on the board, you won't be surprised, of Philip Morris Tobacco Company. This is to me somebody who is captured in this image, caught at the worst moment of his life. And I just think it appeared on the front page of the newspaper called the Financial Times. And to me, it's just such a provocative, I can hardly restrain myself watching this particular image. So we could go to the next one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blum. All right, so any thoughts on this image, any shape or form?
You might recognize her.
Yeah.
If you do recognize her, anything about her, anything you remember about this particular context? How is she communicating? Do you remember the context of this particular image, anyone? Any movie buffs? It's a movie called The Piano. The actress is Holly Hunter. Do you remember, anyone know the character that she was playing, or why this would be important as an image to look at facial expression? Anyone want to describe what that expression is? She's a deaf person, she's mute, and so she communicates with her eyes. She's looking very intently back at someone. And we have in our patient population quite a few patients who are deaf and who cannot speak, and who work with sign language, and who communicate not just in writing, but with their eyes. We could go to the next one.
So in this image, maybe a little bit easier to diagnose. Does anybody have any thoughts about this one?
Looks like happiness.
Absolutely. And what features about the face or expressions he's making made denote that happiness?
The cheeks and the eyes, for the most part.
Absolutely. That's what I took from it as well. And I'd even dare to say she's at peace, happy and at peace, because of the way that her face is relaxed. You know, she's smiling, although it's a soft smile. It's not forced. Her eyes are closed gently, not forcefully. And the only wrinkling you see is that kind of squint around the corner of the eye, which is related to happiness that you often see. So she's relieved, at peace, happy about something. Do you have any other commentary you want to add to that, Dr. Blum?
No, I think that's perfect. You selected that one.
Okay, so with this image, again, maybe a little easier to recognize what was going on, but does anybody have any reactions to this? So this image is actually, obviously it's a crying child, but I chose to include this because it was from an interesting photographer, and I believe this is a painting, correct, Dr. Blum?
And it's a painting of a photograph.
Right, a painting of a photograph, and this photographer would make the children cry before taking their photograph. So she was very controversial, a much less extreme version, but somewhat similar to Duchenne and Darwin's work. Some may see it as immoral, but she was really interested in seeing how the face reacts to certain stimuli and how we express that as humans. And then this is the counter to that, right? This is a child completely at peace. The facial muscles are completely relaxed because it's sleeping. So this baby does not have a care in the world right now. So I kind of wanted to juxtapose that with the previous image of the child in distress. So this next image here, on the next slide, I'm going to zoom it out and show the context in which the photo was taken. But does anybody have any guesses as to what may have just happened for her to be reacting in this way?
Potentially like the death of someone. I mean, she looks like she's like in anguish.
Absolutely. But most certainly anguish is, in my opinion, the most prominent emotion that she's giving off. Does anybody else have any ideas? Okay, so this picture, and you hit the nail on the head. This is a woman being escorted by the police and others from an academy in Cleveland, Ohio, after there was a shooting, and 4 people were injured. I'm not positive if anyone was killed, but it was nonetheless a very tragic event. So she's very much in anguish. Her mouth is open as if she's screaming. Her eyes appear that she's been crying, maybe about a cry again. And clearly she's being dragged away from the scene. She didn't want to leave because she has some connection to the school or has loved ones that attend there. So this is another interesting image, and one of the ones from Dr. Blum's collection that struck me the most. Does anybody have any initial thoughts about this? So this image again is the epitome of anguish. Her mouth is open. She's been crying. Her eyes are tearing up. They're red and puffy around it. And the context of this photo is, you may remember the AirAsia flight in 2014 that disappeared. These women have just found out that the flight disappeared and their relatives were on there. So they're coming to the realization that they're never going to see some of their loved ones again. And really, really just a striking and touching photograph. And with this image again, this one is first a close-up of her face, and then I'll give the context of it in a moment. Does anybody have any ideas of what this could be? This is slightly different than the first two I've showed from anguish.
Surely somebody can comment on this one. Heffron, don't you have anything?
This one's kind of hard to tell because it's kind of blurry, but she's also covering her eyes and like most of her face. So I don't really know. She's either really happy or really upset. I can't really tell.
Perfect. I think that's great.
Given the style of the picture, it seems like maybe she's happy. Like the picture is bright and like upbeat, but I don't really know.
You got it.
Yeah, that was great. You're absolutely right. And there was a point that I wanted to make too. Oftentimes people will bring their hands up to their face, or they'll be talking on a cell phone, or they'll have a mask on, and the face will be partially covered in some situations. But I still think that it's important to analyze facial expression, and there still can be plenty of information gleaned from that. As you very well put it, she is happy. The context of this photo is this is a woman that just won the women's Boston Marathon. So she just got done with her run. She's just crossed the finish line, and she's covering her face. She's very exhausted, but also elated to have just won this major competition. And it's sinking in now that she won the championship of that race. And this photo too is one of the ones without context first. Are there any thoughts about this before I move forward and explain it?
Say, Chris, are you good for a twofer on this one? I think you could get it.
I have no idea.
Because he's angry or mad or something, as like a coach at a sporting event or something about a call a ref just made or something.
Yeah, Nadim, I think you got it.
That was exactly right. Very, very well put. So this is a soccer coach who's yelling at a player, not a referee, but that's pretty close, in frustration. So he's furious. Obviously, his mouth's wide open. He's screaming. I also wanted to point out the hair. It appears to be floating in the air in this image. So he's been jumping around, which causes his hair to become a little messy. And it's also damp. So he's been moving around, pacing. Very focused, and in this image, very angry. So that was a great synopsis. Now with this image, Dr. Blum is going to share a little bit about what Kyle Whitmire wrote from AL.com related to this image.
Does anyone know who this is? And because this was just written about, this was in the Birmingham News less than 2 weeks ago. Do you happen to have the exact description with you, David?
No, sir, I do not. I have part of it, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I have this section here. Whitmire wrote, when we're truly
before you do, does anyone know who this is? This is the state attorney general of Alabama, and he made the news, and he made the news yesterday, as it turns out, in a not very positive way, because his organization appears to have been one of the supporters of the insurrection. But 2 weeks ago, when this picture appeared in the paper, it appeared along with a column by Kyle Whitmire, who spent the first paragraph discussing the smile on his face. Could you read any of that? And could advance to the next, well, when we finish that, advance to the next slide.
Yes, sir. So Whitmire wrote, when we're truly happy, we smile with our eyes. The orbicularis oculi muscles pull tight and our faces seem to light up. It's now called the Duchenne smile, which is in reference to Guillaume Duchenne, which Dr. Blum talked about earlier. Then Darwin worked with his, that was the electrode prodding experiment with the face. And the context of this image is when Attorney General Marshall met with President Trump a couple weeks ago. And Whitmire writes that, you know, wherever you stand on the political spectrum, it's clear that Marshall is happy to be there because he is exhibiting that Duchenne smile. His face is lighting up. He's very pleased to be there with Donald Trump. Just interesting too, with the current events that are going on, that this popped up, and that other people are looking at facial expression right now. You know, this was written 2 weeks ago, and it very, very closely relates to what Dr. Blum and I have been looking into this whole semester. So it goes to show you that other people too, not just us, are interested in facial expression and its applications and how we can read people's emotions based on that. And then in this image, some of y'all may know her. This is Olympic gymnast Michaela Moroni after she received the silver medal at the London Olympics in 2012. And this is a very famous photo of her smirking, looking straight ahead. She's clearly frustrated to have not gotten first place. And this next photo here is a picture of her with President Obama, recreating that kind of smirk. So yeah, it's again, very famous photo. So they recreated it when she visited. And this is, you know, a face that we make when we're not satisfied with something, when something hasn't gone our way. And Dr. Blum, what else would you like to add about that?
No, I just think that it was literally the snark or the contempt that everyone in the world saw. And I think Obama was when he invited her to the White House, was wanting to get in on the act, and she really she had a sense of humor about it too, but she showed her true emotion when she stood up on that Olympic platform.
So this next image here, it's very low quality, and I apologize for that.
You might recognize this one. Why don't we just say, does anyone have the first emotion that comes in your mind when you look at this child? Anyone know the context or remember him? This was another photograph that went all over the world. It's a little grainy because it was a still shot from a video.
Looks like maybe curiosity. I don't know the context.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you, Dr. Hodges. Very, very kind. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. I hope he was curious, but I don't think he was in this particular circumstance. But it's not an easy photograph. I don't want to, you know, just think you can look at it and identify exactly what it is. But he's not happy. Any other words that you would just put to this? Just 1 or 2 words? Anybody? Josh, Nadeem, Jonathan?
If I could wager a guess, maybe very, very afraid.
Yes. And we can show the context. He recently, the boy in this picture recently wrote about it. He was a hostage. He is an American who was one of the American hostages taken by Saddam Hussein in Kuwait when Hussein overran Kuwait. And he was called over by Saddam Hussein so that Hussein could maybe soften his image to the world and say he was a pretty good guy. But this kid was scared to death. His hands, which you can't see here, were clenched tightly. Hussein has his hand behind his back and wanted him to sit on his knee. He wouldn't do it. He literally froze and stood there and wouldn't do anything that Hussein wanted him to do, never smiled, just stared at him and just refused to go along with the act. And he became himself a journalist and recently wrote about this moment. And I think we could wrap it up with a few other pictures of some sculpture and then maybe have just a minute or two. We knew this was going to go over, but since there was a bit of a break afterwards, we were hoping he would permit us to just hang on for a few extra minutes. David?
Right. So this sculpture here, this was done by Bernini. And the point of this was to very much exaggerate the emotion that this sculpture, the figure in this sculpture is feeling. It's evident that this man is in agony. You know, he's twisting his head as if he's writhing in pain. The mouth is wide open as if he's shouting in pain. There's some very defined wrinkles and creases around the mouth, and then as well on the bridge of the nose, like I discussed earlier. His eyes are shut, but not like the baby earlier that was asleep where they were just softly shut. These eyes are forcefully shut, which causes the ridges and wrinkles you see around his face. So, this goes to show that emotion can be very, very well expressed through art as well, very distinctly expressed. Dr. Blum, is there anything else you wanted to add about this?
Well, I think it just shows how, imagine making that out of a piece of stone. I mean, it's just the most incredible, one of the greatest artworks ever made. And the next one actually is a lot more exaggerated. This is a sculpture by a very little known sculptor named Messerschmitt in the 18th century, who was never really able to achieve the kind of recognition he should have because he himself may have had some mental illness. But he used himself as a model for his sculpture in the most exaggerated expressions possible. Most of these were not exhibited until after he died, but 150 of them were saved and by a friend of his, and they have been more and more appreciated as years have gone by. But if you ever want to look at almost right down to the muscular level, Franz Xavier Messerschmitt is the sculptor to look at.
And then this next slide here, Dr. Blum, I didn't mean to cut you off, is a work from ancient Greece that has been broken in the process, obviously. Only half of the face remains. But it's still beautiful and renowned as one of the greatest sculptures of all time because of the attention to detail and the beauty of the lower half of the face. Dr. Blum, what else were you going to add to that?
I think that here we are, we only see half of a person, yet I don't think we feel anything other than love and sympathy. Maybe it's sort of sad that we wish we could see the other half, but I'm warmed by this for some reason. Does anyone just have a very quick comment about how they perceive of this when they look at this? Neil, Vanessa, Tatiana, William, anybody? My go-to person, Stephanie.
I mean, it looks like they would be pleasant. I mean, obviously, like the top half of their face is missing, but I feel like a lot of emotion is like communicated through like eyes and stuff, which I mean, y'all kind of already talked about, but I mean, it just looks kind of like a neutral facial expression. Like, I don't know.
Thank you. That's perfect, because I just wanted to make sure you weren't put off by it. I thought you would be more intrigued by it than not, which is really what I am. And I wanted to contrast it with this next image that David will show. Oh, well, actually, that's the other half of the face, but we could go to the next one. When you see someone who comes to you like that, you know, how are you feeling? Because part of looking at facial expression leads us, in my opinion, to think, oh my gosh, what do my expressions look like when I'm looking at them? That's part of communication. Any thoughts about this particular woman?
I'm concerned about her airway compromise.
Interesting. Would you want to hazard a guess as to what this condition might be?
Ludwig's angina.
Oh, that's interesting. It's bilateral and she looks like she's not dying. So
really bad Ludwig's angina.
Well, I think that's actually a good interpretation. You could say gigantism, maybe could be another one, or some kind of, her eyes look so bulging that there could be some thyroid issues and pituitary problems. But in fact, anybody have another choice for this? She's had a face transplant. And she doesn't look like she looked like before this. She had a very horrible condition. She was had trauma and agreed to do this. And imagine waking up one morning and looking in the mirror and not seeing anything that resembles who you were the day before. We could go on with a couple of other quick images and show at least one more example.
Sure.
Would you think the same if you looked at this particular individual? I don't think I would, but indeed, this is another patient who has had a face transplant. We could show the next one. That's who he was.
Yeah, that's who he was. He was a fireman, and he was caught in a fire. The house collapsed in on him, and his fire mask melted into his face during the fire, which caused his face to look like that pre-transplant. So, the previous slide's what he looked like before the incident. This is after, and then the transplant clearly helped out with his facial structure.
And I think last but not least
is this burn victim here. So he's a severe burn victim. Much of the features of his face were lost in the fire, and the skin, as you can see, is it just doesn't retain the moisture and the ability to move around that his skin did prior to the incident. So,
and again, the point is to turn this around on us and think about our own reactions when we look at people who've had trauma. And it might not be this kind of mutilating trauma. It might be other emotional trauma that we have to delve into to maybe understand why they have a depressed affect.
And it's worth noting, how does our face look to them too? Do we have empathetic facial expressions when we see them? Do we have frightened facial expressions, disgusted? How do our faces reflect how we feel back to them? That's worth keeping in mind as well. Now, this next image here is of a primate, obviously, and this is just a short segment that says that sometimes animals' facial expressions can resemble a human's. In this one, it seems to be smiling. However, in the works of Bell that Dr. Blum talked about towards the beginning, the musculature of animal faces and human faces are different. So they are not capable of making all of the different facial expressions that we as humans are capable of. And this increased complexity for humans enables us to express emotion through our faces better than animals can.
This was a famous photograph that was shot by an anthropologist, but he wasn't there to shoot the photo. It was actually the animal himself that shot the photo in a camera that had been left purposely in the jungle. And so this is really almost wide-eyed expression of whatever he's curious about. But it went global and viral, and millions and millions of people have seen this particular photograph. So very lastly,
this image here is just, another funny image. It was a newspaper article on owners that look like their pets. So, this is kind of a comical take on how human faces can look similar to animal faces, but it is important to keep in mind that, like I said, the musculature of our faces are more complex than that of animals. And as a result of that, we can make more expressions with our faces and convey more emotions through our facial expressions. And just near the end here, this is an image that Alexander Rodchenko blotted out the face of an ex-communist. And Dr. Blum, this is something that both of us were very interested in, because this is what they would do in Russia to completely eliminate someone from history. This man, by losing his face, has been completely wiped from the history books, and without his face, he doesn't have his identity. And this was the goal that they were doing by blotting it out. Dr. Blum, do you have something else to add to this?
In photographs and in artworks, they wouldn't even do this. They would actually somehow completely paint out. So this was the artist's use of what was done in Russia by Stalin to show really on a regular portrait the same kind of thing. So that you're looking at the artwork itself of someone whose face is blotted out, as one would have seen in Russia when they would blacken out the face from photographs or completely remove the person by airbrushing out of the photograph.
And so I included this image too. It's a less extreme version of that, but pixelating faces also can take away our abilities to notice subtleties in facial expression and the way the face changes. That's why it's used by TV shows to block out people in the background that they didn't have permission to use their face in the show. And I think it really goes to show that we don't realize how useful the face is in determining emotion until it's taken away. You know, everyone earlier had some very, very accurate diagnoses of what people were experiencing and how they were feeling based on just a picture of the face that I would show from Dr. Blum's collection. But once you pixelate the face or you blot out the face, you just stand no chance. You know, you would need a lot of context to understand that the face is the primary way that we show emotion, and a whole lot can be gleaned from that. And then particularly in medical care and appointments, that enables the physicians to diagnose patients' feelings and provide better care for them. So moving forward, our goal is to study other artists, sculptors, and photographers. It's also to explore body language and art, as well as review literature on medical diagnoses and artworks. So, and then apply this information, like I said, to the medical field.
Thanks for letting us take a little bit more of your time. Were there any closing comments or observations or suggestions for how we could improve or move this forward? Dr. Haynes, Dr. Johnston, anybody at all to just top of the head comment?
I think I'd be interested in how our patients perceive our interpretation of their facial expressions. I guess, like y'all kind of mentioned, you know, that a lot of times we kind of wonder like, oh my God, does my face look like that? You know, or what does my face look like right now whenever we see something appalling? And I'd be really interested to know, like, do people really recognize that? Like, how often do people really recognize, how often do my patients recognize, like, oh my God, why does your face look like that? You know? And then I'd also be interested in knowing, like, does that correlate with my relationship with my patients, or like their perception of my relationship with them? So like, that's kind of the whole idea behind this talk, right? Is building relationships with people by recognizing their facial expressions and being able to like read these unspoken emotions. And so I think it'd be really beneficial, just as a physician, especially as a family physician, to know, is my perception of, or does my perception of people's facial expressions, or like my recognition of their facial expressions, affect my relationship with them? I mean, common sense would tell me yes, you know, but I'd be interested to know, like, to what extent, and like, how is that perceived by the receiving party, I guess.
I can't thank you enough for that as we close, because you've hit the essence of communication. Stephanie, you get a full acknowledgement if we go further with this, but also communication is I've counted it, it's actually like 8 things. It's, I'm looking at you and you're looking at me, that's 2, or I'm talking to you, you're talking to me. But I'm also, as I talk to you and look at you, I'm trying to ascertain how my talking and looking at you is being perceived. And you, I'm sure, are trying to ascertain how what you're saying and looking at me is being perceived. And it goes back and forth until we evince knowledge and understanding of one another. With that in mind, thank you for so much for your input. It's a work in progress. We appreciate it. We thought we would try it out, and look forward to letting you know. We'll be sending out the video link to, and Kevin just posted it on the chat, and we'll also send out a poster of Joshua's work. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all very much for your time and listening. We really do appreciate it.
Very interesting presentation. Thank you.